Welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone podcast with KOMO Sports Director Niko and Najee Moye.
Well, there is a lot to talk about here in Seattle sports. There's nothing going on, though, is there?
There's nothing really going on. I mean, it's a slow season where it's almost the beginning of the new NFL year, and there's almost nothing happening except a fan favorite will no longer be with the Seattle Seahawks.
What's next for DK Metcalf?
And
wow,
gosh, in one day,
I'm not going to put this at the same magnitude, Naj. But it reminds me that in March of 2022, on the same day when Russell Wilson was traded and then Bobby Wagner was released. Again, not the same magnitude, but it's for this offseason pretty darn shocking. Now, listen, we all knew, as much as we hated it, that Tyler Lockett was going to be released. Heck, when I talked to him in January, we knew that Tyler Lockett was going to be let go. Right. But the DK Metcalf news, it's surprising, but also not surprising.
It's also not surprising. I know he's in his last year. He has one more year of his contract. And I know he wants big receiver money. Yeah. Statistically, and I think you'll find that many Seahawks fans will say that he has not played like a big receiver, even though he's physically a big receiver. Would he get traded? Will he get traded? I'm not dead sure.
I think so.
You think so? You think?
Well, listen, and you know this, Najee, right? Like, just because a player requests a trade doesn't mean they're going to be.
Exactly.
It is the usual outcome. Right. But what I'm doing is I'm reading between the lines, and when the reports out there from our friends at ESPN say that the Seahawks are going to let him pursue that trade, that's usually a sign like, yeah, go ahead. Do it.
He wants to get traded to a contender. What exactly does that mean? The Seahawks were close to making the playoffs last year.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe he wants maybe the Saquon Barkley type deal.
Let's make one thing clear about this. He does not have a no trade clause.
No.
And so him preferring to be traded to a contender doesn't mean anything. Right. Other than the Seahawks simply could say, I mean, the Seahawks could trade him to the Tennessee Titans tomorrow if they want to. Yeah. And there's nothing DK could do about it.
They may not be the worst trade.
They could also not trade him because he's under contract for another year. Now, he could hold out of camp, and we've seen that scenario before.
And that gets very messy.
What I think it comes down to when we hear he'd like to get traded to a contender, who wouldn't, don't bank on it because his demand means I shouldn't say demand. His request in that regard means nothing. Right. However, if you're the Seahawks, you're going to try and get a first-round pick for DK Metcalf.
The thing is, receivers have not been getting that. I mean, DK Metcalf, I hold him in a higher regard than Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel is more grade D in Deebo Samuel. Honestly, getting maybe a fourth-round pick going to the Commanders the Seahawks are probably going to get something, maybe a third round.
I think they can get a second.
I think they can. I mean, It's not.
Well, I'll tell you what they're going to do. What they're going to try and do. Their first calls, if I'm John Schneider and you really want to do this,
call Kansas City.
You call Kansas City and you call Buffalo.
Yep.
Both teams that are a DK Metcalf away. I mean, the Chiefs have already won Super Bowls, but Buffalo's never won a Super Bowl, but they've been on this cusp for seemingly 5 years now.
The Buffalo Bills tried to do something DK Metcalf asked by getting Amari Cooper. After they let Stephon Diggs go.
Diggs was a game changer for them, but
it just didn't really add up. Now, is DK that guy? Look, DK is a great receiver. Is he top 10 in the league? It depends. Now, his numbers suggest. I think
so, but yeah.
His numbers suggest that there's maybe about 12 guys better than him.
Sure.
In my opinion. I'm just thinking about the Seattle Seahawks receiver room and how different it's going to look next year.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, you just look at, Tyler Lockett is obviously wide receiver 3. He was wide receiver 3. And like you said at the beginning of the podcast, we knew he wasn't going to be brought back. A lot of years in Seattle. He's basically a Seahawks legend. He's going to get in the Ring of Honor 100%. But that's he wasn't a 1,000-yard receiver, but he was maybe 800. Yeah. 900 yards, caught a couple touchdowns, a great distraction from guys like JSN. And also when we look at DK Metcalf, I just think the Seahawks in the draft are going to look for offensive linemen. They have to. But they have to rebuild the receiving room because if not, JSN is going to get tripled. And he's going to be the only option, So these are things I just think about offhand. But, big day. And you said maybe not comparable to Bobby Wagner and Russell Wilson in the same day. It's not dissimilar.
No, it's just not at the same magnitude.
In the regard as Tyler Lockett, though.
Yeah. Mostly. Well, here's what I would say. Going back to DK for a second, I think the Seahawks' first call will be to the Chiefs and Bills to try and get that 30th or 31st pick in the draft.
I predict Buffalo, honestly.
Will they bite? I don't think so.
Right.
But you never know.
Right.
But I don't think so. I think realistically you get a second-round pick for him.
Sure.
And then so suddenly you have the 18th pick, and then you have your second-round pick. I'm not good at math. I think it's round 50.
Sure.
And then if they get a second-rounder, whatever that ends up being.
Do you
maybe
see a
$40s.
little Trader John action happening? If you
I think so.
Get two second round picks and maybe see if you can eat back in the first round?
Possibly.
Yeah.
And I think that as much as I want them to draft an offensive lineman, we know he doesn't value that position from the regards of draft capital in that way. Now, they spend it on Charles Cross, so, like, let's not say they don't draft linemen. However, but, this is one of the deepest defensive lineman drafts that we've seen in recent memory.
Right.
So maybe that's not your first-round pick, but if there's a game changer there and you're pairing him with Byron Murphy, and it depends on if you can re-sign Jaron Reed and all that stuff, I mean, there's a lot of ways they can go. And then I think they use that second-round pick on a game-changing kind of receiver that isn't going to cost you as much, obviously, as Metcalf in the second-round pick. Right. You got to help JSN.
You got to help
But
JSN.
they also, you got to
help Geno.
This is a new offensive coordinator again, and that's probably, I mean, listen, DK, before I get to, I'm going to finish this point before I get to that one.
Right.
New offensive coordinator. We know Clint Kubiak loves his tight ends.
Right.
And what if if he can't bring Taysom Hill over? He loves Taysom Hill.
Taysom Hill's. I love Taysom Hill. He's a football player. He can do anything.
By name at the press conference. That's absurd. But I think when you look at that, it's one of those things where you ultimately have to look at how they use the tight ends, and maybe they use draft capital on the tight ends.
Right.
And so from that perspective, there's a lot of different ways they could go with these draft picks, assuming they get one for DK Metcalf. That's a big assumption at this point.
I'd be shocked if they get a one.
Going back to DK, I hate that he's leaving because I think he's a great player. But it's hard to blame them. We're not in those negotiation rooms, but he's 27. This is probably the last really big contract he's going to get.
You gotta get the getting while it's getting good.
His career could be over the next game. Football is a violent game, so you got to get that money while you can get it. I know the numbers are a little bit down, but injuries aside, Najee, I mentioned this to you a lot last year. There was a lot of times I'd be in that press box and I'm like, DK's wide open. And Geno didn't get it to him. And this isn't necessarily a knock on Geno. He was under constant duress. Right. And you also had the rise of JSN. But I think that, if you're DK, there's the money thing. But also, there's your third offensive coordinator in 3 years. You're suddenly not getting targeted like you maybe should be. There's a lot of different things going on.
Is this a Seahawks teardown? I know there's a cap situation. No. There's been 4 guys cut this week before Tyler Lockett.
I think it's a reimagining of the Seahawks. I don't think it's a teardown. Look at that defense. I think they're going to re-sign Ernest Jones, fan of the we're a fan of his.
Love Ernest Jones, yeah.
And I think that, they're going to they're just going to live and die by that defense. They want to run and stop the run. We saw how great the defense was at the end of the year. That's why I'm saying in that first-round pick, don't just count a defensive lineman. I really think they're going to go all in on defense, and they're going to – now they have to improve the offensive line. I think they get the extension with Geno done based on all the comments they've been saying. And then they use some of those later picks on another receiver or two or the offensive line and things like that.
We saw how I think the offensive line. I know you're leaning on defense. And defense, we saw what a good defensive line, and we know what a good defensive line can do in the Super Bowl. We saw this. The Eagles' defensive line basically single-handedly won that game, at least on the defensive side. And I just think when you consider that Geno Smith has had the 3 different offensive coordinators in 3 years, and he's been running for his life the entire time he's been the quarterback essentially, and I just think the offensive line is something that they need to focus on. We'll get to that. We have many more draft episodes coming up.
I
love talking about.
It suddenly got a lot more interesting.
Yeah, it got a lot more interesting because there's a lot more things for the Seahawks to do, and they are not one of them teams that you think of that have all this cap room. They have more than they had before, but not a ton. Let's go back to DK really quick. I mentioned I've talked about Buffalo and Kansas City's in one option. I think about a team that I think there's 2 teams I think that maybe are about our wide receiver away from being extra solid. I think about the Baltimore Ravens as number 1. Think about him and Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson and that offense. Michael Penix Jr. is going to get the start in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. Giving him a guy like DK Metcalf.
That'd be cool.
That'd be insane. Now, I know they were far away from the playoffs, and they're not exactly a contender, but think about DK can be a game changer if he's put in the right situation.
Yeah. I think that...
We've seen Michael Penix throw a lot of...
I said it a moment ago. I think he's the guy that puts another team over the top.
I think,
and you look at the Bills, he could be that missing link to finally get them back to the Super Bowl for the first time in 30-some years.
The NFC South is a super winnable division. I want to say that.
I think those guys make the most sense, the Chiefs and Bills, with that obvious need at receiver.
Sure.
I don't think this happens, but I've heard some rumors about the Dallas Cowboys. I don't think it happens, but he could be a game changer for them and take a lot of pressure off CeeDee Lamb and things like that. What do you think happens? I'm going to go out on the limb, and I'm going to say that I think, like I said, the first call is the Chiefs and Bills, and I think one of them bites. I don't know that they give up the first rounder as much as we would love that here in Seattle, though.
I don't think anyone's going to give up a first rounder for DK Metcalf because he also wants a new contract too.
Right, so it's almost like a sign and trade.
So it's essentially a sign and trade. I mean, and he's probably going to want a new contract immediately after he gets.
What if they just trade him to the Titans?
Would that be unfortunate for DK?
The Patriots,
the Patriots.
Know what? The Patriots got money.
I still think Baltimore. I think Baltimore is a great.
That's the kind of second round pick you could do if you trade him to the Patriots because it's in the 30s. Still.
It's in the 30s, so yeah. But I think the Patriots. I mean, they like Drake May. Give Drake May a big weapon. You know.
Yeah,
that would be interesting.
You know, I changed my answer as much as I like the Chiefs and Bills percent. I think he goes to the Patriots for their second.
I like the Baltimore angle.
Yeah,
and
you talk about putting somebody over the top.
You mentioned Dallas, and I just think about Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and DK Metcalf. It's a little frightening as a fan of an NFC East team. And I mean, there's a lot of places that DK can go, but
I don't think this is going to happen. I just want to preface this by this.
Right.
DK Metcalf or Micah Parsons.
It's not going to happen. It could be.
Who says no?
It could be part. Dallas says no. The entire state of Texas will say no.
I'm just saying. This Seahawks team is going to be all about defense and having Geno manage and not throw the ball 50 times a game and try to manage.
They got to get if they want to do that, they have to get an offensive line that he can run behind because they've got two great running backs. And I keep talking about Tyler Lockett. I'm so bummed.
Yeah.
Like I knew, and at the end of the year last year, you definitely said I'm like he's preparing not to come back. Mm-hmm. He's not retiring either.
Yeah.
What do you think that he'll sign somewhere else? Do you think he'll
play somewhere and he'll do so and he'll do really well and he'll be a great mentor in that locker room as well. That's my one thing about this Wednesday that just passed that I really lament is that, and it's not anybody's fault.
Right.
Like DK Metcalf did not come out with this news or something. It was leaked and all that sort of thing.
No.
DK Metcalf, I promise you, is probably upset that his trade request is overshadowing Tyler Lockett's day, and I'm upset too. I'm not upset at DK; it's not his fault.
Yeah, no.
It's just like, oh, couldn't we have this tomorrow?
If you've been on social media around the Seahawks, you know this. They've been treating this as a Tyler Lockett day. I've never seen a more happier release before.
It's unbelievable, and it's really it's classy. On both sides.
No, it really is. Yeah,
and I think that it is classy on both sides, and that when you unfortunately have something like DK Metcalf requesting a trade, that's going to overshadow it. Yeah. If nothing else, because it's a mild surprise and Lockett's release wasn't. Because then the speculation becomes, as we've been talking about, where does DK go next? And I don't like that kind of overshadowed, not kind of, it did overshadow Tyler's day. Tyler is just a consummate pro, a great man. And we were lucky to have him in Seattle for all 10 seasons of his NFL career.
100%. Yeah, Mr. Toe Tap. Russell Wilson, even on Twitter, he's been a couple years away, removed from playing with Tyler Lockett. He's like Mr. Toe Tap, the best in the world to do it. And that's something I think about, just in the end zone, just having the presence of mind to know where he is at all times. And he's a realtor. He's a realtor. He can help you sell a house or buy a house. Yeah, exactly.
It really is incredible. And I think that ultimately, when it comes down to it, this is a business.
Yeah.
And I know this is the cliche thing, but I was fortunate to talk with a couple former Seahawks, Marcus Trufant, Michael Bumpus, as we talk about Bump from Bump and Stacy on Seattle Sports Radio. And they all said the same thing. I mean, like for DK, you got to secure that money while you can.
Yep.
Everything that happened this week with the Seahawks, it's all understandable from both sides. Maybe the number that DK wanted from the Seahawks is just not palatable for what the Seahawks want to do elsewhere.
It's not palatable to what the production they got from him was last year.
Right, sure. Yeah. And I think, and again, as I mentioned a moment ago, I think that was a little bit of where Geno was looking and being under duress. But
we'll go back to this question. This offense has questions.
It has questions.
There's a lot of questions.
Well, it's similar. I hate to say this. I've done this before on this show, but I'm going to do it again. It's similar to like the Mariners, although it's not quite as extreme. Where the Mariners are just kind of making a huge gamble that they're going to be a better team in 2025 because their guys are just going to come back, like Polanco and Julio and all those guys. For the Seahawks, it's a different kind of gamble. They're in a much better position. Let's be honest. But they are kind of, we'll call it a gamble right now, that your wide receiver room is depleted and your offensive line is among the league's worst.
Right.
Outside of Charles Cross, it's kind of woof. Right? Abe Lucas, I think, is a really good player, but he's been really, had a difficult time staying on the field.
Sure.
I think if Abe's healthy and then you focus on addressing the interior with some ballers, then okay, we're talking about at least something that's going to protect Geno.
Right.
But I also think that it's a gamble at this point. Until we see what John does, with the drafts, with free agency, with whatever he trades DK for, should they happen to do that, which I think they will.
I have all the faith in the world in John Schneider. I have 1,000 times more faith in John Schneider than anyone in Mariners ownership. especially if you think about what Justin Turner said about them earlier today.
Oh, those are some scathing comments, yeah.
But you know what? I completely agree with him.
Sure.
100%.
I was really hoping they signed Pete Alonso, but yeah. And he was right there.
There's a lot
at
of
a reduced rate.
At a reduced rate. There's a lot of things happening right now. I'm excited for the beginning of the Seahawks rebuilding their offense because they really are rebuilding their offense.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, they had to rebuild it, and they're going to build it back stronger, hopefully, and more of a ground and pound offense, especially with this new offensive coordinator. There's a lot of things up in the air, especially with Geno Smith, his contract situation.
Yeah.
We're excited. The draft is coming out. The new league year starts. Still going forward, I think the Seahawks will have a better upcoming season than the Mariners will probably. I hate to say that, but we support them as well.
It's a little bit of, we love the Mariners. Yeah, I think. Yeah. But I think ultimately, Naj, when it comes down to the Seahawks, it's a unique situation because I think that they realize that the defense is around where they want it to be.
Yeah.
It's in a much better spot than it was when Mike McDonald first took over.
Sure.
And I think they're banking on that. They're like, we're going to win with defense, and they're going to try and manage everything else. When Geno Smith doesn't have to throw the ball 50 times a game, he's not going to throw as many interceptions, right?
Statistically, that's correct.
Statistically speaking.
Yes.
You've got some great running backs, and if you can, again, we talk about those question marks, but I think they are like, okay, we can get by if we bolster this line without a game-changing threat like DK, both because of the rise of JSN, but because of the renewed emphasis on the run game behind what we hope is a revamped offensive line. So I think that's part of the reason why they're like, you know what? We can live and die with this for at least right now.
I hope you're completely right.
I hope I am. Well, again, it's sad that you're losing DK. But let's summarize this. Tyler Lockett Day, although overshadowed, was still really cool to see.
Mm-hmm.
Mildly surprising, DK Metcalf moves on. If you make me give a top three, I'm going to go with number one being most likely destinations. I'm going to predict the Patriots for a second-round pick.
Okay.
But I think the Bills and Chiefs can dangle 30 and 31, and I don't know that they give it up, but I think that would be the Seahawks.
This is also the same day that the Jaguars also cut Christian Kirk, too. So there's a lot of receivers out there.
There's going to be options out there.
There's options out there.
More than potential quarterback options if they moved on from Geno, which we don't think they are now.
I don't think they will. At least not yet.
Yeah, so I think that, when you look at it in that regard, it's an interesting day. It is one that is forever changing the course of the Seattle Seahawks franchise. It appears DK Metcalf is on the way out. It is certain that Tyler Lockett is on the way out. And I think that it's, Tyler's departure, other than, it is longevity and he's a special individual, as we talked about. But it's also, he's like the last of the old guard, so to speak. He didn't win a Super Bowl
in the Pete Carroll era, definitely.
Right, but he being drafted in 15.
Right.
When a lot of those guys, the Cam Chancellors, the Russells, the Bobbies, the Earl, they were all here still.
Yeah.
KJ Wright. And now it's like that whole era has moved on. It really is a new era. Not if it wasn't already.
This is definitely big.
Yeah, Tyler Lockett's departure is the final.
Definitely closing the book there on a fun era of Seahawks football.
Fun is the right word for it. But what is this new era going to bring? I think they're trying to build it the same way they did, 12, 13 years ago with defense. And at that point, they wanted Russell to manage the game. Eventually, he became.
They let him cook.
They let him cook eventually. And I think Geno's going to manage the game. He's going to have to do it without DK Metcalf. But you know what? Russell, he had some true stars like Doug Baldwin out there, right? Mm-hmm. But there was also underrated stars like Jermaine Kearse, right? And those are the kind of guys they're going to ask Geno to win with. I don't think they make a big splash unless they draft like a highly touted receiver. I think it's going to be
false to that, maybe.
Respectable, but maybe not superstar receivers. JSN's WR1 now, and you're going to rely on him, and you're going to hope it all works out.
We're going to see a lot more Jake Bobo.
I like Jake Bobo.
I like Jake Bobo. I also like Jake Bobo. Also like saying his name, Jake Bobo.
Yeah, so he's suddenly at the moment WR2, but we'll see how that goes. Yeah. But hey, highly impactful day in Seattle sports.
Yes.
Changing of an era. By the way, the Kraken made a blockbuster trade.
Yeah.
It was basically a year of maybe trades and transactions in one day.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, so Najee and I have a lot to talk about. We'll be back with you next week. It's getting down to mock draft time. We're about 6 weeks away from the draft, but also as free agency rolls on, what do the Seahawks do moving forward? And this is what we love. We talk about this often, how Najee and I are in the press box. I get to be at the VMAC a few days a week, certainly during the season anyway.
Yeah.
Had some great candid conversations with Tyler Lockett. He's a good dude. And just in those conversations, that's when you can get those vibes like, yeah, okay, this is happening.
Yep.
And why, and you can get a better understanding which we are so proud to be able to pass on to our listeners and viewers here on the KOMO Sports End Zone. So that was a good debrief. Rapid reaction, as we call it, Naj?
Very rapid. We're still stressed about it, honestly. We're still stressed about it.
We'll come to grips and wrap it up next week with whatever new news the Seahawks are bringing your way. So that was a fun one. For Najee Moye, shout out to our producer, Taylor Corlew. I'm Niko Tamurian. That was the KOMO Sports End Zone. A rapid reaction. DK, Tyler.
Bye.
Gone.